A business doesn't want to make a loss, what does it want to make?
A doctor who can sell prescribed medicines.
A document protecting people's works.
A list of events placed in time order is usually described as what?
A specialist who repairs leaking water pipes is called?
Computer, telephone and typewriter, which one is first invented?
Historians use evidence to draw conclusions about the past. Would a contemporary artist's painting of an ancient battle be an original source or secondary source?
How many days are in a leap year?
How many days in a week?
How many people are there in a quartet?
How many seasons are there in a year?
How many years does a centennial celebrates?
How many years does it take to finish undergraduate study?
How would most people travel to work each day, in big cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo and New York?
How would you describe an economy that is largely based on farming?
If a coat had a stain on it, where would you take it?
If a figure is hexagonal, how many sides does it have?
If a person is doing an experiment, what would he wear to protect his eyes?
If something such as fabric or medicine is artificially made, what do we say it is?
If there are 8 black balls and 1 white ball, and I randomly pick one, which color is mostly likely to be picked?
If you are feeling fed up, is it a positive or negative feeling?
If you have a toothache, who would you go to?
In a recession, does economic activity increase or slow down?
In business and advertising, what does PR stand for?
In medical terms, are antibodies harmful or beneficial for patients?
In the animal kingdom, is the purpose of camouflage to attract a mate, to find food or to hide? In which direction does the sun arise from?
In the sentence, he has been quite upset since he went back to school, which word uses a past tense? Name a city in the U.S.
Name the month that falls between April and June.
On what geographical location would someone be living if their country is surrounded by water on all sides?
How does a pedestrian travel?
Profit means gain or loss.
Some calendars begin the week on Sunday. What is the other day which commonly starts a week?
The large island just off the coast of mainland Europe is the home to which country?
The people who protect the public from criminals are called.
There are two main ways to pay for goods bought in a shop, one is by cash, and the other is by. There are two types of sporting contests, one is amateur, and other is ____.
To cross over from one side of the river to another without using boat, what is usually required? To improve their health and fitness, most people either try to improve their diet or
To which of our sense do all of the following words relate? Opaque, vivid, brilliant, shiny.
What appliance do people use to keep their food cool and prevent it from spoiling?
What are the people that plant food, raise crop commonly known as?
What are the things that hens lay?
what are winter, spring, summer and autumn?
What do ophthalmologists specialize in?
What do we call a company or organization that gives money to a sports or arts event in exchange for advertising?
What do we call a period of 1,000 years?
What do we call a picture that doctors take to see inside our body?
What do we call the alphabetical list, at the end of the book that tells you where to find specific information?
What do we call the date a piece of work must be finished by?
What do we call the first meal of the day?
What do we call the organ in our chest that we need to breathe?
What do we call the study of living things?
What do you call a list in front of a book which outlines the structure of a book?
What do you call a person that can't hear?
What do you call a very long essay, that students have to write for a doctor degree?
What do you call the number of people living in a specific area?
What do you call the strap that circulates a person in a car or an aeroplane?
What do you need to see things which are far away?
What does a king or queen wear on their head at official ceremonies? What does a sundial measure?
What does ASAP mean? What emergency service is called at sea?
What features do pianos and computers have in common?
What kind of movement of the sun can be seen during dawn? What is a person that belongs to an organization called?
What is a series of events that happen in your mind while you are sleeping?
What is a violent conflict between two or more countries?
What is hematology related to?
What is it called when two or more people are speaking to each other? What is 1/2 of 100%? What is the antonym of vertical?
What is the day that someone is born?
What is the destructive program that spreads from computer to computer?
What is the economic sector that deals with farming?
What kind of food that vegetarians do not eat?
What is the job title for someone who looks after your teeth and gums?
What is the job title for someone who designs buildings? What is the joint between your shoulder and your forearm?
What is the last game in a sports competition that decides the champion?
When you bake a cake, where do you put the tray into?
What is the meeting point of the sea and the sky?
What is the month between January and March?
What is the name of a system of government in which the people elect their leaders?
What is the name of the field of study that studies the human mind and behaviors?
What is the opposite of positive?
What is the opposite of southeast?
What is the red liquid that flows from the heart to the rest of the body?
What is the study of stars and planet called?
What kind of skill can you learn from a culinary school?
What is the subject that involves geometry and algebra?
What is the time of a day called when it is after 12 o'clock in the day and before the sunset?
What is the time period before noon called?
What is the shape in geometry that has 3 sides?
What key mineral makes sea water different from fresh water?
Which organ controls your speech, feelings, body movement and thoughts?
What piece of equipment shows a person what direction they are traveling to? What plan shows how much money is available and how it will be spent in the future?
What planet do we live on?
What identification document does most people need to carry when they travel between countries?
What do you call the type of animals that give birth to their offspring?
What type of resources does an electric device use?
What do you call a period of 10 years?
What do we call it when the moon completely blocks out the light from the sun?
What's the 26th alphabet in English?
What's the place of areas where a college or a university is located?
When would it be safe to take medication that causes drowsiness, before sleeping, driving or operating machinery?
When you create a table chart, the data in horizontal dimension is organized in rows and the data in vertical dimension is organized in what?
Where do we find urban areas, in a city or countryside?
Where do you pay for your purchases at a supermarket?
Where would you expect to find equipment like microscopes, bounce and burner, beaker and petri dish?
Where would you find a whale, tropical forests or in the ocean?
Where would you go to see an exhibition of artworks?
Where would you go to work out on a treadmill?
Which one is a good phenomenon, high employment or low employment?
Which is usually considered against the law? The use of illicit drugs or the use of prescribed medication?
Which kind of punishment for a crime is the less severe, an imprisonment or community service?
Which one is quicker, running, walking, or jogging? Which one is using manpower, plane, car, or cycling?
Which part at the end of book can be used for further reading? An index or a bibliography?
Which section of a newspaper gives the editor an opinion?
Which source is more reliable? Magazine or journal?
Which symbol is used to complete a sentence?
Who is the main journalist responsible for producing newspaper or magazine?
Who is a person that makes bread, cakes and pastries.
Who serves food in a restaurant?
Who would you consult to treat a fear of crowded places, a philosopher or a psychologist?
Will it be better to use km or kilogram to measure the distance between two cities?
Would it be better to jogging at noon or in the early morning, if you wanted to avoid the hottest part of the day?
Would you go to a pharmacist or a surgeon to get a prescription filled after visiting a doctor?
Which one of the following is not a mythological animal: unicorn, giraffe, dragon or mermaid?
What is the job title for someone who makes meals in a restaurant?
If you are happy with an agreement, what would you like to put at the bottom of the contract with the date? What is the verb form of the noun abstention?
How many hemispheres does the equator split the Earth into?
Which shape in mathematics has the concept of perimeter and diameter?
What is the opposite word of subtraction in mathematics?
What shape has four sides of the same length?
What system does the Earth belong to?
What do we call the frozen water?
How often is an annual conference held in 1 year?
Do unions work for workers or management?
How do you describe the line that segment a circle?
How do you describe the line that divide a circle into the same half?
How would you describe the process in which ice becomes water?
If a couple have a boy and a girl, how many children do they have?
If someone's response is simultaneous, is it quick or slow?
In the word postgraduate, what does post mean?
Some magazines are published once a year, and some are published twice a year. How do you describe the type of magazine that is published 4 times a year?
What attitude would you have when you are in a job interview, enthusiastic or passive?
What century are we living in now?
What do humans and animals need to inhale for survival?
What is a thermometer used to measure?
What is the table that lists chemical elements in order of atomic numbers in rows and columns?
When something has increased by triple, how many times does it increase?
Where would you normally see crosswords?
Which of the following is not a means of transportation, by plane, by public transportation or car model?
Which one is easier to recycle? Plastic or paper?
What does ice become when you heat it?
On a computer, what is Times New Roman an example of?
Paper manufacturing results in the destruction of what natural resource?
What do you call a university student who has not yet attained a degree? A new lecture is arriving later this week on Wednesday. If today is Tuesday, when will they arrive? Today, tomorrow or next week? Which potentially hazardous activity involving the inhalation of tobacco products is widely discouraged by doctors?
What is the name of the title of the main article in a newspaper, often in large letters and bold print?
What building on campus can you borrow books from?
How many sides does a pentagon have?
What's a suitable snack for a vegetarian? A roast beef sandwich or some fruit salad.
What material is normally used to make windows and light bulbs?
A correlation is a link between cause and what?
Where on a college campus would a periodicals collection be located?
What plan type would you describe sage and mint as?
What do we call a person who works for organizations without being paid?
What is the occupational title for the composer of a novel?
In what a collection of photographs assembled?
If a form asks for someone's gender, what two answers are possible?
What is the name of a note from a doctor that allows a person to get medicine from a pharmacy?
If a person's blood alcohol content exceeds the law's maximum, which everyday activity is he or she prohibited from undertaking?
What is the opposite of stale?
What do you call someone who speaks two languages?
A sabbatical is a lengthy time away from what type of activity?
What is the profession of a person who repairs cars?
Where in the book would you find the index?
Every 4 years the best athletes from around the world gather to participate in which international sporting event?
What do we call the two holes in the nose, which we breathe through?
In statistics, what kind of figure shows a circle divided into different segments?
What is the first paragraph of an essay?
What reference book is primarily a collection of maps?
What is the name of the document that people use to describe their work experience to potential employers?
What do we call a mountain which could erupt?
What liquid do mammals produce to feed to their baby?
What organ pumps blood through the body?
On which continent are the languages Korean, Thai, and Hindi widely spoken?
What is an object that orbits the Earth for communication purposes called?
What is the name of the room where scientific experiments performed?
Which part of the human face is used for smelling and breathing? What do you often hear immediately after seeing lightning?
What is the term for two siblings who were born from one mother at the same time?
What is the word for the joint in the middle of your leg, which allows your leg to bend? Which star gives heat and light to the earth? Which academic subject focuses on the study of past events?
What is the place you share bedroom with your classmates?
What is the top surface inside the room?
Where do marine animals live?
What do you call your cousin's father?
What substance would farmers spread into the soil in order to make plants grow more successfully?
What do we call the lenses which people use instead of glasses?
What do we call the people who move from one country to another country, usually for work or a better life?
If someone tells you the truth, what is the opposite?
What is another way to say the arrangement of musical notes in a tune?
How do we describe the food that is not cooked?
What do we call the form of substance between gas and solid? Which part of our body is related to the word optical?
When we say someone is doing the BA in History or Literature in the university, what does BA stand for?
What do we call a place where people live permanently?
What is the opposite of guilty?
What is the barrier that can prevent floods from damaging our home?
What is the antonym of entrance?
What includes everything in the world such as stars and planets?
What does the word TV stand for? What do we describe the space with no air in it?
Who flies an airplane? What's the calendar that follows the movement of the Moon? What do we call a person who leaves college before finishing the studies?
What do we call a political institution or body that is responsible for a country?
What is BA for, such as history and literature?
What do we call a short piece of writing containing the main ideas in a document?
What do we call a horse-like animal with a single horn on the head?
What is the room in which you keep things when you don't need them?
What do we call a set of answers to exercises or problems?
What is the verb that describes traveling on boat?
What do you pay when you park in a wrong place?
What do you call your uncle's son?
What do we call a person who is hurt in a criminal case?
What do we call someone who studies languages?
In winter, what activities do people usually do on snow mountains by standing on long, thin boards?
What do we call a person who buy things in a shop?
What is the main building of a large company or an organization?
What do we call a person who can speak several languages?
What is the joint connecting the foot to the leg?
We call numbers like 1, 3, 5 odd numbers, then what do we call numbers like 2, 4, 6?
Which button do we use to remove something from computer?
What do we call a dream that is very frightening or unpleasant?
What do they call the pieces of puzzle which players try to piece together?
What is the couple's formal relationship called?
What do we call the selling and transporting of goods to another country?
Where are goods stored before sale?
In sport, what do we call the cloths that we wear and end above the knee?
What do we call a child who will soon be a teenager?
What do you call a statue or a building that is dedicated in memory of someone?
What do you call it when a person copies someone else's writing?
What organs in your body are for chewing?
What is the opposite of north?
What is the term used to describe a period of 7 days?
If someone tells something funny to you, what is your reaction?
What is the act of reusing waste materials?
Which part of our body does a gastroscope look into?
What do you call a word formed from the first letters of other words?
What do you call the people who work on boats?
What does subterranean mean?
What do you call the persons who study religions?
What gas will be generated from the boiling water?
What do we call a baby cat?
What is the nominal form of the wide?
When trains or cars need to go through a mountain, where do they enter the mountain?
Where is a criminal kept as punishment?
What do we call a person's move to a more important job or rank in a company?
Which one in the 4 seasons has the lowest temperature?
What is the facilities on shore that monitor ships or communicate with them by radio signals?
What is the pointing device used in a presentation?
What does sub-Mediterranean refer to? Whose job is making and repairing wooden objects and structures?
What do we call famous people?
What is the highest position in the embassy?
What thing do postgraduate students have that undergraduate students don't?
What is the act of jumping into the water?
What force makes humans stay on the Earth?
How many years are there in a bicentennial?
Tomorrow's lecture has been cancelled. If today is Tuesday, then on which day is the lecture cancelled?
In the Solar System, which heavenly body produces sunshine?
What do you call the government where the power is concentrated in the hands of one person?
When you have the primary, the secondary, what do you have next?
What do we call people who write songs?
What is the room that is under the ground floor?
Where do people go for watching sports or games?
What material are windows made of? What is the music that is recorded for a movie or a film?
Which color do we make by blending black and white?
Who is the Swiss greatest scientist in physics?
What do we call the extra performance that actors give?
What are the strings on shoes?
What is the name of the student who has not completed his course?
Which part of our bodies do we use nasal spray in?
What material is used for most of vehicles and craft?
In the library, which books we are not allowed to bring them out with ourselves?
What is the ceremony called for marriage?
What do we call the liquid which is in a car?
How do we call the car that uses two types of fuels?
What is the name of male sheep?
What do you call the female partner in a marriage?
What do we call a machine which carries people from one floor to another in a high building?
What do you need to submit for completing a degree in the university?
Where do passengers stand waiting for a train in the railway station?
What is the most important document you would have to show if you would to hire a car?
What general part of the day is known as dawn?
How do you call a student that has finished his first year?
What do we call the line between a sunset and the sea?
Which day of the week starts with th?
What is the name of ceremony in which two people get married?
At what age does someone become a teenager?
What do you call a professional trained to treat illnesses?
What do we call someone who travels and works in a spacecraft?
What do you eat when you are sick?
Which one word is used for a brother or sister?
What device do you type on when you use a computer?
What do you call a disease which spreads by contact?
What is a word or expression that has the same or nearly the same meaning as another in the same language?
What shines at night in the sky and uses its own brightness?
What is the occupation that transfers one language to another language?
What is the opposite of the word public?
What do you call a person who is guilty in terms of law?
What do you call the diagram which includes x-axis and y-axis? What is the opposite of maximum?
What is the adjective opposite to rural?
What object do we open a window or a door by?
What do we call a room just below the roof of a house, often used for storing things? What is the scientific study of rocks? What is the connecting part between two bones?
Does mathematics or linguistics cover the study of the relations between numbers?
How many years are there in a half of a decade? If you do something every day, you do daily what?
What do we call the meeting where an employer asks a potential employee questions about their work experience?
Which country is in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia or Canada?
In normal circumstances, would 4 hours of sleep per night be too much, too little, or just right for most people? Would most people spend greater amount of time eating, drinking or sleeping? Which part of the hand do we use to pick up objects?
Language is usually expressed in two forms, spoken and
What do employees get at the end of the month?
What do you call the huge heavenly bodies that orbit the Sun?
What is the term used for a person who cannot read or write?
What is the process of teaching and learning called?
What is the payment of a student's education by an organization called?
Who cuts men's hair?
In addition to the A, E, what are the other three vowels?
What is at the top of an eyebrow?
How do we call the people who work in companies?
What category do the bee, the butterfly, and the mosquito fall into?
What is the color that refers to environmental protection? What do birds use to fly? What is the horizontal line that separates the globe into two halves? What are the people who study history and historical evidence? What do you call a person who lives next to your house?
Where do passengers wait for airplanes? What do we call a large building with a square base and triangular sides? What do we call buying and transporting goods from another country? What do we describe an event which happens once every year?
What is the synonym of destiny?
What do we call a person who trains a team in a particular sport?
What do we call the weather conditions like rain, hail, etc.?
What is the three-dimensional shape of circle?
What do we say if we call brothers and sisters in a same way?
What do we call the phase in a trial in which both parties interrogate each other?
What do we call a table showing days, weeks and months of a year?
What do we call the musical instrument which has 6 strings?
What type of body covering helps to insulate burns?
What is the generic term for a person who once had the same title as you have now?
What do you call the hair that grows above your eyes?
What is the opposite of the minus sign?
Which continent is Canada located in?
Where does a pilot sit in an airplane?
What do we call a slight shaking movement in a part of the body?
What is the straight line between the center of a circle and any point on its outer edge?
What do we call a statement presented in court by a defendant or a lawyer?
What part of the body propels a flying bird in the air?
What handicap equipment is used for broken legs?
What is the opposite of the word import?
What is in the opposite direction from the head?
What do we call the people who live next to you?
Where do we make our cars?
What is the round, yellow part in the middle of an egg? What do we call a collection of large quantity?
What are breakfast, lunch, and dinner examples of?
What do we call the state of believing in oneself?
What do we call the clothes that need washing?
What is the opposite of negative?
What do we call the component of a camera that should be developed in darkness?
What is the general term for painting at countryside or natural view?
What is a painting of a person's head called?
What's the name of the company that produce books?
What point of the compass is directly opposite east?
What is the opposite direction of northwest?
What is the altitude related to, weight or height?
What is a part of the digestive system and is essential for churning food?
Which is more expensive, gold or silver?
What is the item of footwear intended to protect and comfort human foot?
What is a standard set of letters that is used to write one or more languages based upon the general principle?
Which number does the root OCT indicate?
Where do teachers sit at the university?
Where can we read a book electronically?
What do we call a person who thinks only for himself or herself?
How do we call the people who study animals and plants?
What unit do we use to measure temperature?
Which is the season of the year when plants start growing again?
What color do you get if you mix red and yellow?
What do you call the part of the theatre where actors perform?
What drink do people get from cows?
What do we call a ship that carries goods from one place to another?
When you make a cake, what do you stir in the milk?
What do we call the opposite to the end of a story or a book?
What do you use to dry your body after a shower?
What do you call a country where there is no king but a president?
What do we call a person walking in the street or in a crosswalk? What is the opposite of groom?
The sense of hearing will allow you to hear. Then what sense will allow you to see?
What do we call a liquid that is used for washing hair?
What do we call the cool area under a tree?
What is the time after noon called?
What is the general term for painting at countryside or natural view?
What piece of equipment would you use to go diving in a sea, an aquaplane, or an aqualung?
Where would you most likely go to buy some flour, a bakery, a florist or a supermarket?
What is the political system in which a country is ruled by a king or a queen?
What do we call the building that doctors and nurses work in?
How do we call a person who writes his own story?
What do you call the food made without applying chemicals or artificial additives?
Which of the 5 senses are you using if you detect the odor of gas in a laboratory or in your kitchen?
What do people wear gloves for when they do experiments?
What is the general term for paintings of the countryside or natural views?
Tons, kilogram and stones measure what property? Would a supermarket, a cafe or a bookstore probably have the widest range of products available?
What's the name of the company that produce books?
What is a part of the digestive system and is essential for churning food? When a company's financial status is improved, do its revenues decrease or increase?
If you want to reference all pages in a book that discuss a certain topic, where to find it?
What do we call the place selling gold and silver? There are several customers and a waiter pointing at the menu. What are they doing?
What does the sun do during dusk?
What stellar system do the planets, such as Saturn, Jupiter, belong to?
What is the line between countries?
Do scapegoats escape or undertake the crime?
What is the fluid that pumped from the organ related to cardiology? What is a man-made river called?
What kind of knowledge do scientists believe in, subjective or objective?
What is the opposite of ending in a film or movie?
Which one is the odd one out among dog, cat, horse and shoes?
What order is a bibliography usually listed in?
What kind of educational institution does a 10-year-old child study in?
What are the 5 things in front of your foot?
What is the thing which we use for painting and is made of hair?
What do we call a mass of snow, ice and rock that falls down the side of a mountain?
Who takes care of people who are sick and stay in hospital?
What device is used to measure a 200-meter sprint?
What is the device that shows the time of the day according to the shadow of sunlight?
What do we call the tall buildings that stick into the sky?
What do we call the thing we use to put into the lock and open it?
What rises from the east in the morning and sets to the west in the evening every day?
What is the description of events that is spoken with background music during a film or a play?
What is the device that controls electrical appliances on and off?
What do we call people who work on ship or plane? How do we call the young horse?
What do you call the son of your sister or brother?
Where would you go to see an exhibition of sculptures? Where would you go to see an exhibition of sculptures?
How many quarters are there in a calendar year?
What do we call a person who writes a book?
How many sides does an octagon have?
How do you call the money that you pay in advance for receiving newspapers or journals?
How many years are there in a century?
What is the section in the library where books can be read but cannot be borrowed?
What do we call 3 children born at the same time to the same mother?
What do you call a picture or design permanently on your skin made with a needle and ink? What is the storyline or the series of scenes of novels, movies, short stories or plays?
What is the process of choosing a person for a position by voting?
What do we call the extra working time?
What is the opposite of forward?
What do you call the substances used to speed up a chemical reaction? What do you call a doctor specialized in eye treatments?
What do you call a difficult time when economic activities slow down, and there are more people unemployed?
What is the process of moving information from a computer to the Internet?
What do we call the animals that live in the sea?
What is the huge truck that contains oil?
Where do weddings happen?
What day is the first day of a week which starts with T? What day is the first day of a week which starts with T?
What do you call something that can be carried easily, portable or cumbersome?
What is the phrase used to describe the way something repeatedly increases and decreases?
What do you call a person who is 100 years old or more?
What is the short sleep in the afternoon? Who test eyesight and sell spectacles?
What do you call an animal living both on land and in water?
What do you call a string of beads used for counting prayers, rosary or garland? Which one deals with rules of language, grammar or literature?
Which one means, not limited, infinite or finite? What document does a student get when graduating from the university?
What is the most important part of the human respiratory system?
Where will you go when a crime happened to you?
What do you call an animal that hunts for food or preys on other animals?
What is the verb describing the process that water becomes ice?
One in half represents what percentage?
What do we call one of 4 equal parts of something?
What do people with claustrophobia fear?
If you are celebrating a biannual activity, how many years ago did you celebrate it last time?
What do you call the people who visit sightseeing locations?
How do we describe a person who is educated?
What is the study of plants?
What is the opposite of even numbers?
What is the taste of foods called?
What do you call a person who is suspected by the police?
What is the warmest part of the Earth's surface called?
What vehicle runs on railways?
If a flight is not international, then what is it called?
What series of process will politicians go through for election? What are buses, trains, and cars used for?
What do you call a natural tendency for people or animals to behave in a particular way?
What do we call the cloth that covers the screen after a movie ends in cinema?
What is the opposite of dangerous? What category do crystals, rubies, and diamonds belong to?
What do you call your nephew's dad?
What part of a plant has petals?
What do we call a section or a part of a book?
What instrument would you use when you want to weigh something up?
What do we call a group of mountains such as the Himalayas?
What do we call the joint that joins the leg to the rest of the body?
What is the process in which a doctor finds out the illness?
What is the direction of the longitude lines on the Earth's surface?
What do we call the document in which a political party announces their plans before elections?
What do you call a leave which is taken for a general reason?
What do you call the money you pay for speeding on the road?
What do we call a person who is registered for the election? What is the process of breaking down plastic and glass and using it again?
What is a mass of ice floating in the sea?
What do we call a bicycle with 2 seats and 2 pairs of handles?
How many days are there in 1 year?
What do we describe a person who would like to help others?
What is the electronic device whose function is about the arithmetic of numbers?
What do we call learning a lot of things in a short time in preparation for an exam?
What flight starts in a country and ends in the same country?
What is the opposite of horizontal?
What revolves around the Earth?
What do we call a list of the times when classes in school happen?
What are the imaginary lines that run around the Earth vertically?
What do we call a large notice or picture sticked on a wall? What do we call a player who is going to replace another one on the field?
What do you call the daughter of your sister or brother?
Who is a person who gives evidence in court?
What do we call a material that helps to insulate fire?
What does MBA stand for?
Who prescribed patients medicine?
What do workers get by working overtime?
Where are you going if you are in a downward direction in a map?
What is a strip of hard ground along which aircraft take off and land? What do we call the device with two or more blades turning quickly to cause a ship or an airplane to move?
What do we call a person who lives permanently?
What do we call a scientist who studies planets and stars?
What do we call a fear of large and open space?
Who prepares and sells medicine in shops or hospitals?
What do you call a person who operates X-ray scans?
What is the name of rugby sportswear?
Who serves and helps passengers in a plane?
When a runner runs, what is this state of breathing?
How many sides is a peninsula surrounded by water from?
If a student fails to show up in a class because of illness, how do we describe it?
What do you press at the door when you arrive at someone's home?
What do we watch with a screen and a projector?
What is the final step of a bakery?
What do we write on blackboards with?
What do we call the action of giving money to influence someone in power?
What do we call the type of energy that uses uranium to generate electricity?
What do we call a person who writes and checks financial reports?
What subject studies the science of animal behavior?
What do we call the thing that covers a bride's face?
What do we call a man who is getting married? What's the gray thing in the sky when it's about to rain?
What do we call the long, orange thing that grows underground?
What do we call the party in power?
Ears are for hearing. What are eyes for?
What do we call the phenomenon that a volcano throws out lava, ash and steam?
What do we call the sounds at the beginning of a movie?
What do we call a member of the same team or group?
What do we call the person who plays sports to make a living?
Where do buses stop?
What term is used to describe a person who rides waves on a special board in the ocean?
What do we call a person who reads a book?
What is the opposite word of export?